Hi everyone, welcome back to another video in the Web Security Academy series. In today's video, we'll be covering lab number 7 in the cross-site scripting module titled Reflected XSS into Attribute with Angle Brackets HTML Encoded. If you do not have an account on the Web Security Academy, you can get one by visiting the URL portswigger.net/websecurity and clicking on the sign up button. I already have an account and I am logged in, so to access the exercise, I'm going to click on Academy. Select all labs, do a search on cross-site scripting labs, and then go to lab number 7, titled Reflected XSS into Attribute with Angle Brackets HTML Encoded. Alright, let's get started. This lab contains a reflected cross-site scripting vulnerability in the search block functionality where angle brackets are HTML encoded. To solve this lab, perform a cross-site scripting attack that injects an attribute and calls the alert function. Alright, so the target goal over here is to exploit a reflected XSS vulnerability to call the alert function. Okay, let's access the lab. Now notice over here, this is the built-in browser in Burp, and so all my requests are already being passed in my Burp proxy. Alright, so as usual, the first thing we're going to do is look for input parameters that take client-side input that is reflected back to the user in the application. So a search field is a classic example of that. If we put test in here and click on search, you could see that our input is reflected back to us over here, and it could also be potentially reflected back in other places in the code that is just not visible to us through the browser. So if you click right over here and then search for the string test, you could see that we have two matches. So it's reflected back in the H1 element, so the heading. It's also reflected back in the value attribute of the input element. So that's interesting. We've got two places where it's reflected back to the user, and so these two places need to be tested for cross-site scripting vulnerabilities. The first thing I'm going to do is put in a character that is usually used for cross-site scripting attacks and see if the application encodes special characters on output. So if we click on search right over here and we look for the request, if we go down right over here, you could see that in the heading field, the angle bracket is URL encoded. So that's good. That means it might not be vulnerable to cross-site scripting and it might be vulnerable to cross-site scripting. So we don't really know. And in the value parameter, or in the value attribute over here, it's also URL encoded. This means that we can't use the less than sign or the angle bracket in our exploit. This makes it hard to kind of exploit it in the heading parameter over here. However, we might be able to exploit it in the value attribute. So if we take this right over here and we copy this entire string and we put it in here, what we need to do is enter our payload over here. However, we need to enter it in such a way that it does not break the JavaScript. So the first thing that we're going to do is enter a double quote, which closes this double quote over here, which is provided for us already in the code. And then we're going to use an event called onMouseOver equal to alert 1, and then this double quote will be closed by the double quote that is provided for us. So let's copy this entire thing right over here. This would be the payload that we enter, and because we formatted it correctly, it shouldn't break the JavaScript in the input parameter right over here. So let's go back, put it in here, click on search, and here we go. It says, congratulations, you solved the lab. So the idea over here is when you do hover over it, you should get the alert message. And if we go back to the request over here, you should be able to see it in the response. So the alert over here, we're not exploiting it in this parameter over here, but we are exploiting it over here. So you could see that it was interpreted as JavaScript code and therefore it called the alert function. All right, so we successfully completed the exercise by exploiting the reflected XSS vulnerability. In the next lab, we'll look at another case of a cross-site scripting vulnerability.